Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, as long as you think it's worth it, of course. How about subscribing to my channel and hitting the notification bell so you're informed when I post new videos. For the past 6 months, for reasons I won't go into here, I've done very little Photoshop work. So I was quite surprised recently when I started to do a little bit of layers work in Photoshop and suddenly went to do something and, you guessed it, the mind just goes blank. For a moment I just could not work out how to easily flip a layer. So why do I tell you this, and isn't that something I should keep to myself? Well, no, I think it's quite normal that with a piece of software as complex as Photoshop and even Lightroom and others, if we're not using them on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't take long before that memory starts to fade. The good news is, of course, it soon comes back. It's currently the 7th of November 2019, and yesterday Photoshop updated to its 2020 version. I doubt it's going to impact on what I've got planned here. Now, the images you can currently see in Photoshop's bridge here, they're all raw files of course, were shot in a place called, I'm a little bit unsure how to pronounce this, so I'll just put it up on screen and you can choose your own pronunciation. But it's on the west coast of the island of Tasmania. All of the images were shot from a tripod using an f8 aperture. The lens was a 24 to 105mm set at 40mm. But as you can see by the 3 images that have the green label, they were all bracketed exposures. Now I suppose we could ask the question, do we actually need that in these conditions? The answer is probably not, but it is my favourite way of working, and at least I didn't get home, which would be 2,500 kilometers away, and then have doubts about the exposure that I gave. I can easily put in the bin any frames that I don't want to use. So the 3 images with the green labels, the one on the far left is the exposure the camera felt was correct. The one in the middle is 1 stop less exposure. The one on the right is 1 stop more exposure. And as I said, we could probably get a good result from any one of these, but I'm going to choose the one on the left. On this particular occasion, the camera got it right because we was there at the right time of day. But I could easily get a good result from the one on the right too. Now it may be stating the obvious as I open this image up into Adobe Camera Raw, but the better your exposure, the easier and quicker your editing is going to be. Not only that, but the digital negative you're starting with offers you more creative scope too. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you're putting all of your thinking into just getting your image to the point it should have been at the button press, then there's a good chance you're not leaving a great deal left for any creative thought. Also, in getting to a point we should have got to at the shutter press, and perhaps we didn't, we've also started to erode our image quality. Image editing is a series of small steps. Each of those steps may not be significant on their own, but when we add them all together, then we can see a massive difference between the image we begin with, which is our raw file that needs our editing, and the image we complete. Now the place that I always like to start with is lens corrections and chromatic aberration. Now we'll find them up at the top just underneath the histogram. This is the little icon we need. But just before I tick the boxes here, first of all I always tick this one to enable the profile corrections. I'll do that now because you'll see the effect it has on the image. All it's doing is just making adjustments for the known distortion of the lens I'm using, and you can see it's all automatic, quick and easy to do. But before I tick the little box to remove chromatic aberration, let's take a look at what we're dealing with. When we've got warm tones like this, sometimes we don't always see them very strongly, but chromatic aberration is almost always there. So what I'm going to do here is to click and zoom in over that woodwork, and I'll drag it up a bit. We can clearly see the effect of chromatic aberration here. So if you keep your eyes on at least the top there, while I go over to the right hand side and I tick the box, you can see that the chromatic aberration is removed. And if I untick it, you'll see it come back. Now it's important to do this because if we go back to the basic tab, if during the manipulation of this image I want to push up the saturation, I'm going to make chromatic aberration a lot worse, aren't I? So it makes sense to deal with it from the start. So back to the lens corrections then, and we'll tick the box. In some certain circumstances, you may see a little bit of sign around the edge like this. I'm not sure it is chromatic aberration, but what you can try if you wish. I'm going to suggest that 99% of the time ticking that box will be all you need, but you can go to the manual option here. Maybe we can go down to the green amount here because it is a greeny look, and we can step that down and see if we can improve that. It's not making a great deal of difference. Let's try moving the slider to the right into the blues. I'll double click that and look at it as I step it down. It doesn't seem to be making a great deal of difference, so it appears we've got rid of most of the chromatic aberration that we're going to have. I'll hit Control 0, which will fit the image back on screen. The editing that we do in Camera Raw doesn't need to be the same every time. It doesn't hurt that we jump from slider to slider, but a routine isn't a bad thing to develop. In my routine, I'd be looking next at any dust marks in the sky. Now the camera that I've used here is a Canon 5D Mark IV, and it's relatively new and clean of dust, but I'm sure there's a couple of spots already. But what I'd like to do is to select the option. So let's select the spot removal tool here, and right down at the bottom left of the palette on the right, we can tick the box to visualize the spots. Now even when we do that here, because the camera is fairly clean, we can't see very much, but we do have a slider as well, so I can crank that up and have a good look around. And it's not until I get almost to the maximum that I can see evidence of maybe one, maybe two spots, but probably that's about it. There's evidence of one, that ring you can see there. So I'm going to bring the size of my brush down to just about covering, give it a click, and it should disappear nicely. We can always hit the V key to remove that bounding box so we can see more clearly, and hit it again if we want to bring it back. There's another little mark up there, but I'm not even sure it's a dust mark. It's probably a part of the cloud. So looking around very, very carefully, in this particular circumstance I've only got one to do, but if we was doing this in 6 months time, I'm sure I'd have one or two more. So I can untick the box for visualize spots. Let's hit the H key on the keyboard just to bring me back to all of my other options here. We'll go back to the basic tab. Where do we go from here? Well, maybe straighten the horizon if required, and crop if required. Not sure we want to do that here. I'm a great believer in trying as best I can to frame up my image as I want to use it in camera. Not always possible, but when it is, then I'll take advantage of that. But if I go up to my crop tool here and I click and drag, what we sometimes notice, of course, is we don't have the rule of thirds. When I installed the new version of Photoshop 2020, I know or noticed that it removed the setting I usually have set. If you go back to your crop tool, click and hold, there's the overlay option, so I'm going to choose to show that. So you can see here that my composition looks pretty good, and because we've got that straight line and we can see the trees in the distance, I don't think I need to straighten this image at all, and I don't think I need to crop it at all, but we're all going to have a personal view of that. So I'll just hit the Enter key and we'll move on from here. One of the next tasks that I usually spend a bit of time on is the color balance, and I'm a great fan of the white balance tool right up at the top left, so I'm going to go up there and select it. This is the one I'm referring to. What I'm looking for in the image is an area that is neutral in tone. Now we don't have many of those in this particular shot, so I can click around and see the result. Even if I get this wildly wrong, I'll do it deliberately for a moment, even if I get things wildly wrong, it's no great problem, because if I go over to the right hand side to the temperature and the tint and just double click the sliders, I can reset them to where they come from, or I can just click in another location. So what I should be looking for is something that is neutral in tone, something I'd expect to be maybe neutral grey. Well, we've got a lot of dark tones here, there's not a lot of grey at all, so I'll click into the distance there and see if that helps. You can see it warmed things up a little bit. We can try other locations. Let's try the water in the foreground. It gives quite an attractive look, but not entirely natural. What about coming up to the sky and clicking there? Not a great deal of difference up in the blue sky at the top. Now that is more reminiscent of what I saw in the evening. And when you think of it, the top part of the sky is going to lose the blue with the warm colours of the sunset. So I'm going to live with that, but of course we don't have to. We could use the white balance eyedropper tool and then fine tune the colour with these two sliders. But I'm reasonably happy because from what I recall, it looks more or less as I remember it on that particular evening. Now when it comes to adjusting the sliders for colour, clarity, contrast, etc., we need to keep our eye on the histogram at the top right, but here's an idea. Why not hit the Auto button and use that maybe as a starting point? This is the Auto button I'm referring to. When I click that, you'll see that Photoshop changes all of the sliders. Now, even if we don't want to use those sliders exactly where they are, Photoshop is certainly moving them in the right direction. So if the very minimum, Photoshop is giving us a huge clue here to where we need to be. So looking at those sliders as they are just for a moment, I'm going to look at pushing up the clarity, which is one of my favourites. Maybe just a touch more vibrance. I'll take just a little bit of dehaze and see what effect that has. Not a great change, I don't think. Maybe I'll drop the blacks a little. You can see it's just making a small difference, and even the exposure if I felt that was necessary. We're all going to choose something slightly different here, but the auto setting didn't do a bad job at all, did it? So where would we go from here? Well, I think the weakness of the image is in the sky, the top quarter of the sky. Now sometimes I would come down to the icon at the bottom left of this right panel and open this image as a smart object, then make a copy of it and then open one version to adjust the sky. You'll notice on this particular occasion it says Open Image. Since I installed Photoshop 2020, it seems to have removed my favourite setting, so bear with me for a moment. I'm going to go down to the hyperlink at the centre bottom of the screen. That's the little box that I'm looking for, so I'm just going to tick that, and when I do, you'll notice that the button changes instead of Open Image to Open Object. But on this occasion I'm not going to use the Smart Object status to adjust the sky, because I think the sky needs a bit of colour. So let's do that with a graduated filter solely within Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to pick up my graduated filter at the top of the screen. You can see the little cross at the center top. I'm going to click and drag to draw down the bounding box. This tool will always remember the last settings you used. So if you look over to the right hand side, you'll see that the last setting was an increase in exposure. All the other sliders are central. What I tend to do, personal choice, is I usually right click within the bounding box. This works with the circular filter and the graduated filter and even the adjustment brush, and I reset the local settings. So that's the point I'm starting from. And what I'm going to do as well is hit the V key to hide that bounding box. If we go down to the bottom right, we have a color option. It's just white with a cross in it, but if we click, there's the option. I'm going to put my eyedropper here up at the top left somewhere, and we'll instantly see the impact that's having on the image. Then I'm going to drag it to the right to see what sort of color I think works best with my image. Do I want a blue? I don't think that's going too well. I think somewhere up here, a nice warm glow, something like that. So we're getting a sort of a match overall. Here we get the opportunity to drop the saturation, but to be honest, I want a fair bit of saturation here. I'm going to click OK to that, and what I may also do is just drop the exposure down a little more. See how we're balancing it now nicely now with the bottom of the image. We're sort of holding the interest in a lot better, I feel. But I'd like the center of my image much lighter. I'd like to draw the eye into this center part. Now we can do that with the tools within Adobe Camera Raw, but let me take the opportunity of showing you a slightly different way. Just before I do though, sometimes I will add a second graduated filter. If I wanted just the top edge slightly darker, I would click and drag to bring down another graduated filter. I can hit the V key and you can see what I've done here. There you can see the effect of it. It's just giving that slight darkening of the top and the corners, which I think look quite nice. So I'm going to just open this up into Photoshop. I'll let that work in real time. Hit Ctrl-0 to fit the image on screen. I hit the wrong thing. I hit Ctrl-O. I'm sitting in a slightly darkened room. That's my excuse anyway. So we need a timeout here. Look over on to the right at the top of the layers. You can see a little symbol at the corner of the thumbnail. That's telling us we're working on a smart object. So maybe I'll do the next stage using the smart object way. So let me move up to the image, go to the right of the thumbnail, right click and choose New Smart Object via Copy. What I'm going to do here is select the bottom of the two, not vital which one, but this is most convenient. I'm going to double click, it'll open up into Camera Raw once again. And what I'm going to do here is to try to do something with the highlights. Maybe just lift the exposure a bit. You can see what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this area here, not necessarily anywhere else. I think maybe there's a bit too much color in this area here. Maybe I'll just drop that down. Let's have a look at that. It's the tones that I'm looking for here more than anything else. And I'm going to click OK to open that up. We won't see the effect of it because obviously it's sitting below this layer. So there you can see I've got a much nicer foreground, but I don't want it overall. Select the top layer, apply a layer mask, go over to the toolbox on the left. I need to choose black as my foreground color. I need my brush. We can hit the B key for that. I want a standard soft edge brush. You can see a little symbol of that up there. I want the opacity set to 100%. I want my flow set very, very low. 5%, that's probably going to be okay. Maybe the brush is a little big, but not that much. Now I can just add a little bit of lightness just in the areas that I want to draw the eye into. And I find that a nice way of working, where I can just blend it in wherever I want. I can take my time. If I decide I've overdone it, I can switch black to white, and I can just tone it back until I'm wholly satisfied with the balance I've got between the two. Loads of different ways you can do this. This is just one of them. Now, one of the other things I quite like to do, I'm going to go back to this copy of my image. We've got to remember now that if we make any changes to one layer, we're going to need to do the same with the other. But I don't think it's going to impact on this one. What I'm going to do next, if I double click this, I can open this back up into Camera Raw, pick up my circular filter, and I'm going to click once into the screen. There you can see what's happened. You can see now, if you look down at the right, it's remembered all of the settings before, including the color, and we don't want that. So I'm going to right click and reset them. I'm going to hit the V key. All I wanted to do here was to put a little bit of a vignette around the edge, not very much. You can see why I doubt I need to do that on the other copy, but some changes we might. I'm going to click OK, and of course what we can do now, if we were happy with that, we could save that as a Photoshop file, we could save it as a JPEG, then we could decide if there's any other creative avenues open to us. Now here's one idea. I'm going to go back to that top layer again and double click, because I'm going to do some experiments. I would have saved this version, and now we're going to do a little bit of adjustments. I'm going to take the clarity completely off, and I'm going to take the texture completely off, and we get a lovely soft focus, almost a long, the effect of a long exposure. For some reason, when I do that, I feel the need to brighten it a bit. I'm not entirely sure why, but my creative side of my brain is telling me to do that. So I'm going to do that. But now I think I have got to go in and do the same with the other layer if I wanted to keep this in layers. But that's not too difficult. Clarity off, texture off. I don't think the exposure is that vital now, so we'll just click OK to that. Just taking a few seconds to put that in place. And of course we're done. Let's take a look at the two versions in isolation just for a moment. Let's start with the original of the two images before I reduce that texture slider and also the clarity. Of course, the beauty here is I've got both of these images saved, so over the next few days I can compare the two to decide which one is strongest in my opinion, because it takes a few days sometimes. We certainly need to sleep overnight to then look back and decide which of the derivative images we may have created is the strongest. And as we move on to the soft version, where I reduce the texture and the clarity slider, I can be safe in the knowledge that not only have I got a single layer file of the original plus this image, but I've also got my Photoshop layered file that contains two smart objects. So I can live with all of these images to decide which one is going to be best in the long run. But even if I have a change of heart overnight, I can come back to my original, I can double click the smart object, and I can have this image back open in Adobe Camera Raw to make any changes I think are appropriate. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I brought you back into Bridge just for a few moments. This is the original image I created. This is the one that's sharp. It doesn't have the reduction in texture and clarity. One of the things we can do, we can copy the settings we've used for one image and see the effect on others. What I'm going to do here with the image you can see highlighted is right click. I'm going to choose Develop Settings, and I'm going to copy the settings to the clipboard. Now I'm not going to apply them to these two, but I could apply the self-same settings I've got here, although it will not take the graduated filter, but that's no big deal. But let's say I wanted to apply those settings to all three of these just to get an idea of what they look like. I could select them all, and I use the control key to do that. Right click, develop settings, paste settings. Now we get asked if we want to paste all of the settings we've created. Remember what I've just said. Unfortunately, it will not paste the graduated filter, but that's quick and easy to reapply should we need it. So I'll just click OK and you'll see the effect. Now when we view these images, we may say, no, that's not working at all, or actually that one there looks quite nice. So I could either just accept the settings that I've applied, but of course I have the other advantage here. To double click that image, it'll open up into Adobe Camera Raw with all of those changes made, so I could tweak those if I needed to. Now the effect on this image I quite like. I like the warm tones on the base and the cooler tones of the blues at the top. In the previous image we put a graduated filter on the top and we added warm tones to match the base. Here we can do something different. Let's pick up the graduated filter. Let's drag the filter down. I'm going to go to the color options on the right hand side and click. And I'm going to go up to the blue and move that cursor along until I get a nice blue color that I can live with. I can't go too far into the mauves, but certainly back to about that point. I could drop the intensity down, but in actual fact I quite like what I see. So if I wanted to now try this as another version, I can open this up into Photoshop. And as long as I save it as a smart object, and we can see it's a smart object by the little symbol at the bottom right, then we've got the best of all worlds here as well. Control 0, fit the image on screen. I can see a couple of issues here though I'd like to address, just to bring this video to a final close. And to do this I do need to remove the smart object status from my layer thumbnail. So if I move my cursor to the right click and choose rasterize layer, there it is gone. We're back to a standard layer. The couple of issues that I don't like too much is the fact I've got a few of these posts sticking in on the left hand side, and I wish there was a gap there. I can live with them from that point to that point, but I'd also like to lose a little bit in the bottom corner too. To fix that, I'm going to use Content Aware Fill. Now to fix this area I need to make a selection. Doesn't matter which selection tool we use, I'll use the lasso. I'm just going to drop the size of my image down just a little bit so I can see the corner easier, and I'm going to draw a very quick and simple selection. Then we need to go up to our edit menu and choose Content Aware Fill. There's two parts to this screen. The left side is where we're creating the repair and the right side is the result. Now we can look to the bottom left of this image and we can see already that it's doing a great job. If it wasn't, we've got the opportunity via the brush here, you can see that up at the top left, either in minus mode and there's a plus just above it to add to it, but we can determine what Photoshop uses to make the repair. But as we can see here, it's done a pretty good job. So down to the extreme right to click OK. One thing it does is to put the repair on a different layer. So Control D will remove the selection. I'm going to reselect my layer to do the next part, which is the little woodwork uprights there. So maybe I will zoom in again here just to get this a little bigger. With the same tool, I just want to tell Photoshop, look, that is what I want you to repair. Now let's see how Content Aware Fill manages this. Now just before I go up and reselect the Content Aware Fill, I'm just wondering whether I've made that selection a little too tight. So I've got the little plus sign there showing alongside my cursor. So I'm going to just enlarge that selection just a little bit, not much. And then we'll go up to Edit, Content Aware Fill. Now I'm looking on this side I've got a tiny bit of ghosting there, I think, that hardly anyone would ever notice. Let's remove those uprights, see if that makes a difference. It changes things, but it's not really having a massive effect. That looks quite good. There's a little mark there I'd like to retouch in. Most of the time when I use this option, 99 times out of 100, it does a terrific job. Here, maybe we just need to touch this once or twice with the spot healing brush. But I think we've taken this as far as we can go and keeping things simple. So let's just click OK to open this up. Control D to remove the selection. We would save this maybe as a layered file, but at some stage we want to select all of those layers and choose Merge Visible or Flatten, whatever is your preference. And if you needed to do just one or two touches here, we can do that with the spot healing brush. So here we can take a look at this particular version isolated on its own background. Always a nice way to view images, I think. And of course I could have used that technique where I can copy the settings from one thumbnail in Photoshop's bridge to many others, because the images that I showed to you were just a few of those that I shot that evening. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.